Most people will say we're going downtown, but for us down in Dodgeville and Hebronville, I thought that we always said we're going to go uptown. So for us from that environment, we went uptown. I've been almost 80 years, mostly in Attleboro, and I definitely have personal observations and personal assumptions. Many of you here from Attleboro have probably seen Attleboro from a different perspective. Here's mine. I was born in Attleboro, a Dodgeville boy. I'm a Dodgeville boy. And we have other Dodgeville connections here. Some of my earliest memories are vague, but there are memories from when my family lived in the big block, what they call the big block at the corner of Henshaw and South Main, correct, Noella? And I remember being across the street in back of the mill houses next to the railroad track, and I was terrified when the trains would come. I remember running around to the front of the house on South Main Street, whoever I was with. And those were steam trains. When they went by, they left the pall of smoke, the soot that you got in your eyes. And yeah, I have very vague memories there, but came the day when my family made a decision. We were moving. I knew nothing about it. I was just along for the ride. Two of my siblings are here tonight. My sister Noella, here in the front. My sister Danny. Now Danny is younger than me. She's the little girl in these photos up on the thing. I'm the little guy with the beret hat. And the other guy is my brother Paul, who's not here. The family decided to go down to the farm. I had no awareness of my grandparents, my mother's parents, who owned the farm. It was 90 acres, half of which were on the South Main Street side of the railroad tracks, half of which were opposite side of the tracks, abutting Old Camp Hebron. So the farm wrapped around Old Camp Hebron, and then we had the South Main Street end from Thurber Avenue almost back to where the old lumber company was built, Dutton Lumber, in the beginning. And my grandfather, my grandparents, I don't know when they acquired the farm, sometime before World War II. I suspect that the farm was probably up for taxes. I'd love to have somebody prove it or disprove it, but I think my grandparents probably got the place for taxes. Things worked that way in those days. And I know they didn't have 2 cents to rub together. They homesteaded right here in Attleboro. You hear these stories about people going west and homesteading. They homesteaded here in Attleboro. When they moved into that farmhouse, it was derelict. They had no running water. They had to clean the place out. The animals had gotten in the building. It was void of windows. And they're trying to make a home out of that. My grandfather trashed. There was a well across the driveway. My grandfather cleared the well of all the trash, fixed the plumbing. He got that old well going. It was a Thurber family well. That was their water supply to clean the old house. I didn't know this. I'm finding this out after. So the day we moved, we walked to the farm. My mother is pushing a baby carriage. Now, our youngest sister was not born, so the person in the baby carriage had to have been you. My mother was pushing the carriage, so I was there, and there was one other person. It had to have been my older brother, Paul. And down we go about a half a mile, near the Dodgeville Playground, up Thurber Avenue, and I find out that I'm moving into a different house. And that night, I remember climbing into bed that night in that strange situation. My brother and I shared an old metal, you know, the old metal frame beds. He and I were bedmates. We shared the bed in a little room downstairs in the farm. And I remember that, like any kid in a strange place, the strangeness, the sounds that you hear and that are odd and things like that in a house. So it was a gradual experience. I got to know who my maternal grandparents were. They lived upstairs. The house was divided into two living areas. They lived upstairs with my Aunt Jeanette, who wasn't married. And she looked after my grandparents. And my grandfather was a very, very hard worker. He had customers uptown. Here we go, uptown. And he hauled junk, he cut lawns, he cleaned yards. He did odd jobs. He had a clientele. By the time I became aware, he had a clientele. I see in the front of the building coming in here tonight, the corner marking for D.E. Makepeace Company. I went by that thing as a kid in my grandfather's old International truck, going into D.E. Makepeace yard. And I loved going there because why? They had an electric fence. They had an electric gate that the guard would open up. And I thought that was magic. And they had the same thing over at Wolfenton's. My grandfather did work for the dye house. He did work for the Bigney building. And then he had residences here in Attleboro. And one place I loved to go with him in the old International truck was the Sweet Estate, the corner of Speedway and Park Street. That was a special place, that house and the buildings. They had peacocks over there, which I liked. So I learned to live on the farm. I learned about the farm. My grandfather did raised crops. He had 4 garden plots. He had the front plot beside Thurber Avenue. He had 2 plots down to the left and the back along the railroad tracks. And the plot on the top of the esker by the railroad tracks. That plot on the top of the esker, that's where he grew his asparagus. That guy grew the most beautiful and fabulous asparagus. And he planted corn and strawberries. He had red raspberries, which we kids got into. Golden Bantam sweet corn, that was his corn of choice, Golden Bantam. Beets, big carrots. And my dad had an acre out back that my grandfather said to him, you can use that out back. So my dad had his own acre out in the back. It's still there today. He'd plow that and harrow that with a horse. And we all participated in one way or another down there in the garden. Walking behind the horse was special when he plowed a furrow. And the rides on the wagons through Attleboro. I'm drifting here. I can go in so many directions here, but what I'm trying to say about the farm, I lived there prior to my first grade year, and I can't tell you exactly when we started living there. That's gone. But I do know I went to the middle part of my 4th grade year in a Finberg school. And to look at those years as a little boy with full access to 90 acres, brooks, woods, streams, fields, farm plots, an active railroad line, which is to any kid who wasn't scared of the train. I eventually warmed up to the train and enjoyed that part of Attleboro history. I witnessed the transition of steam to diesel, and then when we went to diesel on the main line, we got a Bud liner. Do you guys remember the Bud liner used to come through Attleboro? It looked like a big, what are those campers? Oh, the Streamliner. We call it a Bud liner for some reason. That Bud liner was shiny, sparkled, and we enjoyed that I enjoyed that for the number of years I was there. But came the day, and these things happened in the family situation changed. And I discovered partway through the 4th grade that I was going to be leaving that place. And to leave the farm was like I lost part of me. Leaving that, I want to cry now. Leaving that farm was so difficult for me because I love the place. And to this day, I love it. But we moved uptown. I knew a little bit about uptown because I'd go with our grandfather on some of his trips up to Attleboro. And one of his favorite places to go whenever he went uptown, he'd get his gas, what he called gas. And we'd go to the Jenny station on Railroad Avenue. That was his filling station of choice in Attleboro. How many remember the Jenny station on Railroad Avenue? You do. How many? And that was his gas station of choice. They sold white gas, whatever that was. And I'd go there and sit in the truck and watch that little propeller go around on the pump. You know how the old gas pumps had the little propeller thing that went around? I love that. But that little gas station was tucked right into the train bank on Railroad Avenue. And across the street was Mr. Gordon's bicycle shop. How many remember Mr. Gordon's bicycle shop? Huh? She does. Noella remembers. And there was, on Railroad Avenue, there was a place called the Tip Top Cafe, Watson's Diner, and before it burned, there was Brownell Mill Supply up, and supposedly there was a bowling alley upstairs, but I never saw that part. And then there was a factory on the corner, and there was the downstairs loading platform over at that railroad depot for the Railway Express Agency. Where did that go? They were tied to the railroad, and they didn't roll with the punches. The rail service, the freight service was failing, and Railway Express fortunes were tied to the railroad, and their business did a nosedive. Trucking was becoming popular, delivery trucking, tractor trailers, that was coming into vogue. So Railway Express disappeared. We moved uptown, my family, we moved to a rented house, a nice 2-story rented house on Franklin Street, number 9 Franklin Street in Attleboro. And we lived there. Well, I loved that neighborhood. But it was quite an adjustment. Going from 4th grade at Finberg to 4th grade at Willett, which was and is a beautiful school. Sam Thomas was the principal. Miss Galligan was my 4th grade teacher. Miss Spalding was my 5th grade teacher. And Miss Morton was my 6th grade teacher. And then when I got to 7th grade, the last year at Willett, I had a new teacher, a homeroom teacher. His name was Joseph Genero. And I liked that guy. His dad, he used to tell us stories. His dad worked on the construction of the first nuclear submarine, the Nautilus. His dad worked on that submarine, and he used to tell us stories about that. But Willett School, melding into Willett School was extremely difficult for me because I was not accustomed to the affluency that I found when we moved uptown. I came from blue-collar Dodgeville, blue-collar Hebronville, and I really didn't know any other world as a kid. So when I got to Willett School, it was a culture shock. I was in with kids, I won't name names, I was in with kids whose parents were professionals, who were business owners, movers and shakers in Attleboro politics. And those kids, I realized, had advantages that I did not have, and I could not cope with it. That 4th grade was tough for me to meld in with that population. But I did eventually. And in that environment, we had a nice neighborhood. I had Old Capron Park. I spent half of my summers in Old Capron Park when Bill Sharkey ran the park. And I discovered the 4th Street, Franklin Street neighborhood, Willett Field, what is now Larson Woodland and all of that, the Watson Factory, Highland Country Club, Skunks Pond in the back. We skated on the skunks. So it was really quite a neighborhood. It was before Mr. Yeager built his house down on the golf links there. And I discovered the real uptown. Attleboro in the 50s and 60s, as I experienced it, was a dynamo. We came out of World War II as an intact economy. Europe was a wreck. I didn't know it. I was a kid, but I didn't know it. The Far East, Asia, Japan was a wreck. But our economy was humming. And during the 50s and 60s, you could get a job anywhere in Attleboro. If you were warm and breathing, you could get a job anywhere in Attleboro. And I got to see the factories and the people, the downtown. We went to the Union Theater. My mother wouldn't allow us to see a Marilyn Monroe movie. All right? That was a no-no, you know. We'd go to the Union Theater, she said, "Is Marilyn Monroe in the movie?" "No, Ma, no." Okay. And we'd run through that stinky little tunnel under the railroad tracks to get to the Union Theater. And I learned about Uptown. And I started seeing the parades up there and started to learn that about World War II. I really didn't know anything about it. And when I was down the farm one day playing, right in that top picture, a little 40s tan-colored coupe car, I think it was a Ford, kind of a coupe shape, come down our driveway on Thurber Avenue, down the farm. And it drove right up to the house, up in that top picture on the right up against the house and parked. And my sister Mary Ann got out of the car. Now, I really didn't know my sister Mary Ann because she was much older. I'm a little guy, and she's much older. And she gets out of the car with a guy. They go in the house, they're visiting the folks. Well, that guy married my sister Mary Ann, and his name was Bobby Goulet. Some of you know Bobby Goulet. Well, here's Bobby Goulet Jr. right here. And that was my first sight of Bobby Goulet. Well, they got married. I went to the wedding reception at the VFW on Starkey Avenue and Pleasant Street. We all went to that wedding reception. It was a beautiful wedding reception. I was a little kid. And we got this guy comes into our family. And as time went by, he ran Bobby's ice cream shop on Bank Street. And as time went by, and Bobby, you correct me if I'm wrong, but I started to get the story about Bobby, the guy that married my oldest sister, Mary Ann. Nicest guy on the face of the earth you ever want to meet. Kindest man. And he was in World War II. He started the little ice cream shop on Bank Street. And it was a Bank Street, there's a sign, Bobby's Ice Cream Shop. Well, he started that little shop, I guess before the war broke out. And he was in business. And the war broke out, Uncle Sam wanted him. So off he goes with all the guys in Attleboro and all the guys in the area into a real hellacious situation. And I was really too young to comprehend the whole thing. While he was in Europe, he was in the 3rd Infantry Division. 3rd Infantry Division went into North Africa, Operation Torch. Then from there they kicked Rommel out. They went into Sicily. He was in Sicily. They invaded Italy. He was in the invasions in Italy, real bad stuff. The day that Rome was liberated, I think the next day D-Day happened. I think the next day, D-Day in France. And then after D-Day got going and they got a foothold in Europe, Bobby's 3rd Infantry then was redirected to the Riviera in southern France, and they made an amphibious landing. So Bobby, in that slide of the matchbook cover, and then the clipping out of the Attleboro Sun, you'll see a little note there from Bobby, a message to the people in Attleboro, and then there's a little in the fine print, Bobby Goulet somewhere in France. Well, they couldn't say where they were because it was top secret. But Bobby went up the Rhone River Valley fighting the Nazis. And when they got up the Rhone River Valley in France, they got over into Bavaria and up into Hitler's Eagle's Nest. And the war ended. The war ended about that time. And Bobby came home. His family had run the ice cream shop while he was overseas. And Bobby picked up the ice cream shop. And when I got in high school, I went to work. Everybody in the family worked for Bobby. And I went over to Bobby's and when I was going to the old Attleboro High School. And I'd run up to Bobby's at the end of school, down through the alleyway and back of Barney's Diner, between the new public market and Barney's Diner, down the alleyway, downstairs, and I'd pot wallop. I earned 85 cents an hour, pot walloping, washing dishes. It was an education. Peeling potatoes, KP. And Bobby had the downstairs, the main stairs in Bobby's went down, and he had a cafeteria down there. Anybody remember Bobby's cafeteria? You remember? At noontime, that place would fill up. They'd be lined up the stairs. They'd be lined out onto the sidewalk. The people would get out of the stores downtown and the factories, and they'd come over to Bobby's for what? A 99-cent special dinner, soup to nuts, couple of entrees, beverage, dessert, 99 cents, a hot meal. How old were you?
How old was I then?
Yeah,
Probably 5 or 6,
yeah,
fifth grade through
Yeah.
8th grade.
yeah. And then when I was in high school, we moved over to 9 Jackson Street, second floor, behind Bill Mullaney's little store over there, right? 4th Street Market. And that's when Bobby's caught fire and burned. And that was, to me, that was disaster, because my dad went downtown to go to work. He usually went to Peter's fruit stand. And wherever he was working, he got a nice piece of fruit, and he'd always buy the Daily Record. That was his routine. Well, somewhere down in Attleboro that morning, he heard that Bobby's had caught fire and burned during the night. And he came back home to where we lived on 9 Jackson. He says, geez, he says, Bobby's caught fire last night. Oh my God. I just couldn't believe it. And what a mess. You guys remember Johnny Mutt's shoe repair? Johnny Mutt's shop was right next door between Brown's and Bobby's. And poor Johnny, the floor in his back room nearly collapsed. And the big machine that he had to repair shoes on was teetering and just about ready to fall into the basement of Bobby's. And that was a nightmare. Bobby tried to start it up again, and eventually he met the cellos, and they got into cellos over there on Newport Avenue, and Bobby was a great guy. He was one of the finest people in Attleboro. He would send meals up into he'd hear somebody was sick up in the apartments over My Lady's or up over Brown's, and he'd call me upstairs. He said, take this up to room 6, second floor. Just hand it. Invariably, it'd be some elderly person, and they wouldn't be feeling good. He'd send free meals. That's the kind of guy he was. But Attleboro was a dynamo. Downtown was humming. The factories were humming. I can't say enough. And Wednesday nights was shopping night. You couldn't find a parking place in Attleboro. I'm talking now the 50s and 60s. Some of the stores my parents frequented when we went uptown from the farm, Zito's Meat Market. I loved the place. I loved those people. Bobby's and Conlin and Donley. My grandfather went there. I went there with my grandfather. I went there with my father. Firestone store. I love that because I could look at all the toys that my parents couldn't afford to buy me. I love the Firestone store. What else was there? The Attleboro Ice Company, going to get blocks of ice from the freezer to go to the beach. Sans Souci's, which was the old trolley stop. I can name six businesses today that have an identity back to the 50s and 60s. Let me try and tick them off. The Gob Shop, Eastern Supply, I'm going to forget one, Attleboro Ice and Oil, Moran's Diner, did I say Bristol Glass? And Bliss Brothers. Name me another one. I don't think we could name another one. And I know another store, several other stores that my parents went to. Kennedy's Butter Store. That place was magic. Where else could you see a block of butter that big? Or a block of cheese that big? With a guy with a big knife with kind of a flat end, and they'd cut those blocks of butter and blocks of cheese into things you could put on a scale and weigh and wrap in wax paper. The place smelled like $1 million. The coffee, the roasted coffee. They sold eggs. They sold maple butter. I love going in that place. I just loved it. And it was a chain. I understand it was a chain in southeastern Mass. Yeah, it was. And then one day came and they all closed. Yep. Kennedy's Butter Store. Silman Shoe Store. You couldn't get finer people in the Silman crew and the Silman family. London's. I remember Max London still greeting customers at the front door, right? And Pine Street, top to bottom, was a neighborhood enclave unto itself. From London's front door across, DeLitta's Market, London's Housewares, Blackburn's, Caruso's Little Barber Shop, the Vacant Lot, the Elks, several bar rooms, Gus's Grill, the best stuffed go hog I think I've ever had in my life. Pizza. My mother would work the evenings in Shields' shop, and Friday night she'd stop with some ladies and they'd have pizza. And I'd get up Saturday morning and find a cold stuffed go hog on the stove and a couple of slices of cold pizza. And that'd be my breakfast on a Saturday morning. I loved it. Gus's, the gas tanks, the gas works, Sam Cohen's shoe shop, where those of us who are on the lower end of the financial scale in Attleboro could buy secondhand sneakers and shoes. And he had them in there like meat, not like fruit tables with his advertising on the window. That little old guy in there, all shriveled up old guy, selling his shoes and sneakers. And in Zito's Market, the Armory, Richardson School, Pete's Tavern. Joe Belanzi had a little store there. Doris worked for Archie Gillette. East Side Playground, a pool, and then there were houses. And then Pete Blair's dad ran the Atlantic Station next to Pelletier's Automotive. And Pat Pelletier did the front end alignment. He was the best in Attleboro. Zips package store. There was another little market the family in Attleboro owned. Well, that was Nolan Spa then, Nolan Spa, but there was another little market in between. And they had that pole where you had to click. First National. And a little pole to get a box of cornflakes from the top shelf.
There's a drugstore where
Say again?
There was a drugstore right at the intersection of North Main and South Main.
Yeah.
Where there's a coffee shop right now.
Yeah, it was a Rexall, was it not?
Wasn't even, I don't even remember it.
Yeah, well, you remember that?
I used to work there some.
Oh, you did? Hallelujah. Hallelujah.
That changed so many times.
Yeah, it did change.
It works there.
The kids' shop, what was that guy? Children's shop. He was over by Atherton's. He had a little hole in the wall store. And yeah. Yeah. And if Coughlin Shoes, Hicks Bakery, and what did people go into Hicks Bakery with on a Saturday? They're bean pots, and Hicks would fill the bean pots up, right? Huh? So I'm going a route here with Attleboro's in the 50s and 60s, but after the 60s ended, Attleboro changed, and we remember the interstates coming through when they were all just circle marks in the roadways in Attleboro, blue and white, bullseyes. And that's where they were going to build a highway through Attleboro. In the interstate highway system, it divided cities and towns and collapsed the main business centers. This has happened all over the country. But Attleboro was a victim of that. The railroad declined, and there was a kind of a rock bottom with the railroad. And then it picked up again as Attleboro changed and the commuter rail picked up. But there's something I observed in Attleboro. When I was a kid down on the farm, it was a right-of-way for what they call line section on the railroad. They had line sections. So our line section from, say, East Junction to the Dodgeville Playground, they would have to come through our farmyard with these big trucks. And they would drive right out on the edge of the railroad track through our yard. Well, right at the front door of this old house here.
Really at the front door.
Really at the front door. You could spit to the railroad tracks. And we lived with the trains going by there. It was quite an experience. But really, I remember being in bed at night listening to freights chug up, the steam trains chug up out of Pawtucket. You could hear them all the way down to Pawtucket and lay in bed. And it would be like counting sheep, if you will. That train would get closer and closer to the house, come around the curve at East Junction, and the next thing I know, the house would rattle. And it would go by the bridge abutment for the Thurber Avenue Bridge, and you'd hear the caboose go by, click, 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 and then it would just fade away. I love the sounds of those trains coming through Attleboro. I loved it. And the other part of the train thing was the hobos. That front door of that old house right there in the middle. Hobos knocked on that door. And I remember the last hobo that came in the house. He was a tiny little slender black man. And he knocked at the front door and he begged a meal. We were a mark. We were a mark for the hobos. And my grandmother would feed them. She'd have them come right in the house. Strangers. Wash your hands, use the bathroom. I'll make you some soup, I'll make you a sandwich. Huh? And they got good food. And my grandmother fed them some really good food. And the last hobo that was in the house, I was watching. And the guy said grace before he ate the meal. He said grace. And my grandmother said to him very quietly, "Where are you going?" He says, I'm going to Baltimore. And she says, where are you coming from? He says, I started out in Boston. So he had some reason to go to Baltimore, and he was hopping the freights. So what I'm trying to say is the freight line was a thoroughfare for hobos in the 50s, 40s, 50s. Disenfranchised men, usually, I didn't see women. What I didn't realize is, as a kid at that time, a lot of those guys had been through living hell in World War II. And a lot of them guys were probably trying to get their lives together, and they were all screwed up, all shell-shocked. We had those guys here in Attleboro, and I didn't know what I was looking at till I got older and figured it out. They'd been through living hell. And they'd come home, they all come home after the war, the guys that survived, and they were trying to put their lives together and not talk about what they'd just been through. And I was too young to understand what was happening till I got older and learned history and understood. And no sooner did they get home and were settling in than my older brother went off to war. He went off to the Korean War. And the parades in Attleboro were fantastic. After World War II, full units of guys, spit polished helmets, boots, spit shine, neckerchiefs, all decked out, and they marched in units through Attleboro. They might as well have been in boot camp somewhere. They looked the picture of military correctness. And then those numbers, as the years went by, those numbers faded. And of course, the Vietnam War, well, that wasn't popular. Those guys, very few of them came home and marched in parades because they weren't welcome.
They probably were too embarrassed and ashamed.
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
of that war.
Yeah. And our brother Gene, when he went in, Korean War from Attleboro, his name's on the common. He died almost a year and a half ago. But when he got in, he was in the B-29 bombers, and they were trying to bomb that big dam up there in North Korea, and they couldn't put a dent in it. And I'm going to say this now. He would go on those bombing runs in the back end, pressurized in the back end of a B-29, and freeze his ever-loving ass off up there in the night, going in to bomb North Korea. And the MiGs would chase them out of there, and they'd hope the MiGs wouldn't get them. Oh, this corner here, the New York Lace, well, that became Brown's. Huh? That became Brown's. And then Johnny Much's was next door, and then Bobby's. And Bobby, there was the Peacock Restaurant, which Bobby finally took over and incorporated into Bobby's. And then what was next door to that between Barney's Diner and Bobby's? I know Bertie Birtwell had a bakery in there. You remember Arnold Birtwell? Yeah? He worked for Bobby. He could make the best Danish pastry in the world. Yeah. And there was Flynn's Hardware. That's another one that I loved to go in when I was a kid. Flynn's Hardware. And then when I worked for Bobby, he did catering. I got to see the Oddfellows Hall, which nobody ever went to. I got to see the Knights of Columbus when they were over Pinot Furniture on Academy Street, right? You remember that? And Johnny's bar room there, and the Park Tavern, the Park Hotel, New Public Market, Woolworth. I'd go in there, and my parents didn't have 2 cents to rub together, and I always craved a hot dog or something from that little lunch counter. And all I got to do was go in and watch the canaries and the parakeets. That was my reward for going into Woolworths. And their Christmas displays. All good stuff. All good stuff. All good stuff. C. Peters. Well, that's the new C. Peters. Yeah, they had you guys remember the little stand they had with the awnings? And they had a little 2x4 triangle right here. That alleyway is still there. And they made a living out of that place.
That's C. Peter's,
Huh? Sick?
C. Peter's scale.
You got them here? I'll be darned. Yeah. That was a hangout. They had a following. You remember Phil Krakowski, the artist? Phil would hang in there, and a bunch of other guys would hang regularly in St. Peter's. Yeah.
And the young teenagers were in the common area.
Yeah.
And would drive their cars with my husband.
Now, Hegney's I never went into in my life. Salzman's on the corner. Soon Lee, get your laundry done and buy bean sprouts. Willie's Bowling Alley. We used to bang on the door Saturday morning to wake the guy up so he could go into Willie's Bowling Alley. And Wagner's Flower Shop, Flynn's Hardware, the phone exchange.
Was there a Chipmunk on the opposite side of the post office?
Yeah, that was a guy from South Attleboro. That was Walter's Meat Market. Walter's Meat Market. Henry Beach was up on Pleasant Street, next to Divine Dairy, what used to be Divine Dairy on Pleasant Street. Henry Beach, yeah. And Mulaney's Market on the east side, Gene Goulet, Bobby's brother, and brother-in-law ran that. And then they built the place down there at Briggs Corner. Oh, Gob Shop, that was Bud Howard Clothier. You remember Bud Howard Clothier? They had black windows with gold lettering. And the old Joe King's Tire Shop was right here. That was Joe King's Tire Shop, a gas station. He had an old wooden fence that went down around Academy Street. Then he built the place across the street. That's Academy Street, right? Yeah. Jack and Harry's, been several places. They were, last time when they closed, they were on Union Street. Jack and Harry's. And Jack and Harry's sister was married to Izzy Solimer. I'd go into Bobby's in the summertime, and after the lunch hour at Izzy's, Izzy would go out in his car to sleep. And you'd walk by his car in back of the new public market, and his legs would be hanging out the window. Sound asleep in back of the diner there. And he had a little baker that worked there named Joe. Anybody remember Joe the baker at Barney's Diner? He played the horses. You remember him? He made them famous cinnamon things that he made there.
Was it Betty that made them?
Huh?
Betty? Bill McDonough?
Oh, Bill Devine?
McDonough.
Oh. Well, Joe did it too.
Yeah, Joe was there.
But I used to see him down in Narragansett Racetrack with fistfuls of betting tickets down at the fence, and the horse would go by at the finish line, and all the tickets would go in the air. I saw that. What else we have here? I never went in there, but this raises an issue. In our little research to put this together, our collaboration, we found a sorry void of the absence of storefront photos here in Attleboro. Well, here's one as an example, the full Monty, if you will, here on storefronts. But I would dearly love to see a picture of Kennedy's Butter Store again, and some of the other places that are gone. They're gone. When we got into this, collaborating about this, we discovered that there was a sorry void out there for business. Now, do you know who Donnelly was? Do you know who Donnelly was? You know who Conlon was? I saw young Jim one day in Seven Stars in Rumford. He used to come in all the time. So one day I said to young Jim Conlon, I said, tell me something. Who was Donnelly? He says, Donnelly was from Pawtucket. He was a friend of my father, Jim. Father was Jim. They were friends. Whenever Jim started got into the grain store, Donnelly was a silent partner. And I think he invested in the business. And Jim Conlon Sr. ran the store outright. And Donnelly never entered the picture except for his backing and support. That's the story I got from young Jim Conlon. That's Attleboro Feed. But you know, the other thing about Attleboro was the freight yard. We had a fully functioning freight yard in Attleboro. And I met a friend recently I have coffee with, and he's a little older than me. He says, I remember a carloads of pigs coming into the freight yard in Attleboro. And I said, how come the pigs would come in? Well, the different farmers around would buy pigs. We had Correa's pig farm. How many of you remember that in the summertime? Huh? Correa's. Medeiros is out in Norton. Tony Medeiros in Norton. And Sharon's, Ted Sharon's grandfather. Ted Sharon's grandfather. He had the biggest pigs I ever saw in my life. And I learned something going down at Sharon's pig pens. What don't pigs eat? Pigs will not eat something. Citrus peels, citrus fruit. They'll push that aside. They'll eat everything else. And my dad used to go down to chat with Mr. Sharon when he had those pig pens off of Reed Street. And there again, that was a great place to go to. Great fun. The skating rink on Capron Park in the winter. The duck pond. And you better have been behaving out there, because sometime every evening, Bill Shockey would come by in his little truck and ride around the duck pond. And if somebody was cutting out there, he'd go right out on the ice and out, throw the perpetrators out. Yeah, Bill was tough, but he was good. Thompson Chemical was built on what was the Frenier gladiola fields in Hebronville. The gladiola fields were a big Indian encampment going way back. And Mr. Frenier, that ran the little store in Hebronville, had an Arrowhead Indian artifact collection from the gladiola field. Now, I was a little kid one day, that age, down the farm, and these two city slickers come down the driveway. I mean, real city slickers. Dressed to the nines, business types. Each one had a diamond pinky ring on his finger. All right? They looked just like they were hitmen. Yeah. I'm They go with my grandfather across the railroad tracks over behind Camp Hebron, and they're talking. To this day, I think they were from Thompson Chemical Group, trying to buy the land. And eventually they bought the gladiola fields. Yeah. And when I moved uptown, we were living at 9 Jackson. It was a cold evening. There was nobody home. I was watching a football game on television. And all of a sudden, the house shook, literally shook. Next thing I know, everything's going out downtown Attleboro. All the fire trucks. And my ear followed the sound, and they were headed south, South Main Street. I said to myself, what is going on here? I put on some kind of a national news, and the guy said there's been an explosion in Attleboro, Massachusetts, and he said the words Thompson Chemical Company, and I said, oh no, because our grandparents were still living on the farm. My Aunt Jeanette was living there. And I'm all alone at home, but I got a car, I could drive. So I said, I said to myself, you got to get down to the farm. So off I go. I don't tell anybody in the family knew where I was. I get down to Hillside Cemetery, and Thurber Avenue and South Main are blocked, barricaded. Attleboro police got it barricaded. Yeah. You were part of that. My uncle and my cousins were involved with the fire. Spike Pelletier Richard, Bobby. Firefighters. Joe Hearn, our uncle, he built a little house, the corner of Thurber Avenue in South Main, near the Twin Village Fire Station. That was our Uncle Joe, and my father's sister, Ida. I get down to the Hillside Cemetery, and I know I can't go through the roadblock. They're not going to let me go through. So I had a buddy that lived there in one of the little houses. Pulled in my buddy's yard, told somebody there that I'm going up to the farm, I'm going to park my car. So now I'm on foot in the dark, and I cut through Little Nichols Avenue, which is a paper street going into the Dodgeville playground. I cut through Nichols Avenue. Now I'm on Thurber Avenue. I'm going up, and I'm opposite my grandfather's cornfield. Now I'm looking down across the treetops, the tree line, toward Thompson. And it's like artillery going off in the distance where the night sky would light up, would light up. Something would blow up down there. And I'm going, oh my God, this is bad. I can hear the stuff going on down there. I come down the driveway. Our driveway came down adjacent to the Thurber Avenue Bridge ramp. Knocked at the back door. My Aunt Jeanette comes to the door. Donald, come in. So I go in, and it was cold, but the house was nice and warm. And I go into what we call we had to go through the kitchen. And then there was the living room, sitting room. They had a space heater in there. My grandparents are there, my Aunt Jeanette, and the mayor of Attleboro. Cy Brennan is in the house. Now, there was a family connection between Cy Brennan and my aunt. So he came down to the farm trying to convince my grandparents and my aunt to leave, because the word was if a certain train car down there on the siding, the fire got to that train car with a certain chemical, that it would flatten from there to the center of Attleboro. And Cy was trying to coax them out of the house. And while I was there, I kept running up to the Thurber Avenue Bridge. There were people on the bridge, a few people on the bridge. Don't know who they were. Neighbors. And I'd look down, straight down the railroad track to the East Junction curve. And what I saw down there would give you the heebie-jeebies. The conflagration I saw going on down there at Thompson Chemical. And I had relatives down there. And I'd run down, I'd get so cold, it was turning cold. I'd get so cold, I'd run back down the house, go in, warm up. And all the while, Cy Brennan was trying to coax the old folks out. And he was using that as a command post that night. We were sitting there talking, quiet conversation. The phone would ring. It would be for him. And it was all the people that he had to talk to manage the fire going on down there. And I was a witness to Attleboro history, kind of in a quiet way. Now the picture of the school right here, I know a guy who was on a detail to clean that up, to clean up Finberg School. The glass, the windows blew in from the blast at the school. And the glass shards were embedded into the wood tops of the desks. Now, if that had happened during the day with kids, there would have been fatalities there. Now, I worked over at the Willow Tree, and I used to wait on customers over there. And that night at Thompson Chemical, we lost one of our customers. He was killed over there. And he came into Willow Tree every week to buy stuff. He'd get out of work, come over to the Willow Tree. His name was Caniglia. He was from Pawtucket. And he's on the list. I think 7 people got killed over there, I think. Yeah, he was on that list, explosion. But can I tell you one other story? I've told this story to one other time. I did a presentation here. This man here with the soft hat, I met him. He came to our back door one day, and he had retired. He was about 90 years old, and he wanted a tour through the house because his grandparents used to own the house. And he used to come and spend his summers there. He was raised in Taunton. And he used to come to the Thurber farm, spend all his summers there. And he had retired from the ministry. He was chaplain of the Seamen's Bethel in New Bedford of Moby Dick fame. Seamen's Bethel in Mariner's Home. He managed the Mariner's Home, which is next to the Bethel. His boss was the New Bedford Port Authority. In the early 1900s, he applied to be the chaplain of the Bethel. And he served that until the early 50s when he retired. And he came to the farm one day and he asked very politely, "Can I come through the house? I lived here." So my mother says, "I can't give you permission," but she got my grandmother upstairs and she came down and took Reverend Thurber through the house. And he would come back to Attleboro until he died. He would speak at the Oak Hill Grange. He would visit my family, come to the farm and visit. There's a book written about him, about his life. His wife's cousin wrote the book. And God Caught an Eel, which is a strange title. I found out the reason for that title. The people who lived in the Ware section of Taunton, when that was a seaport. And there were 2 Methodist churches. And the Methodist church up by Route 138 was a higher, well-to-do church. And the people in the Methodist church down at the Wares were blue-collar, day-to-day people. And the people had a slang term for the people that lived down there. They called them eel catchers. A lady told me that story one night in Taunton. And so God caught an eel. He was aboard ships, schooners sailing the coast. He was a second engineer aboard the Connecticut in a nor'easter blizzard. The steamer went between Jamestown and Newport. And he wrote, and I can't read it because we don't have time, but "I want to come back sometime." And I want to read this dear poem. It's a history of Attleboro. It's been burning a hole in our family's pocket since early 51. And he wrote this poem about Attleboro, about the farm, on the Connecticut, on Narragansett Bay, during a nor'easter. And if you want, I'll come back some night, another time, and I'll read this for you. We'll have story time. Okay. Now let me tell you, one more thing. My 5th grade teacher at Willett School, my uptown teacher, Miss Spaulding, she did us a service. She really did us a service. She had a knack for reading. And she got a book about a little boy that got lost in the wilderness, the White Mountains of New Hampshire. And she read that story to us in the 5th grade in serial form. Several days a week she would read so many pages. And I, as a kid, a 5th grade kid, looked forward so much to that class time. I craved it. And finally we got through that book. And I enjoyed that time in the 5th grade. Never, ever forget it. But I'll tell you, we had some good teachers at Willett School. Miss Galligan in the 4th, Miss Spalding in the 5th, and I was in that downstairs classroom in Willett School with the big bay window on the far end. And I enjoyed that room because it was light. The light came in from all around. Yeah, that far end room was my 5th grade classroom. She talked to me one day, she had a heart-to-heart talk to me one day. I don't know why she got me aside and approached me, but I was a shy kid. I was a real shy kid. And she says, you really should be going over to the Attleboro Library. Attleboro Library. And I was too bashful to go in. And she says, there's a children's room downstairs of young people. You sure should be going there and taking books out. So I took her up on her advice, and I went over to the Attleboro Library, downstairs, a little kids' room downstairs. And that advice from that teacher opened a world to me. I started reading books, taking books out. And I got to the point where I loved history. And I wanted to read a real good historic account of Old Ironsides in Boston. I fell in love with that ship. And I went to the library, and it's probably the lady that lived on the east side that retired from there. Huh? Edna Gillette. I went to her one day and I said, I want to take a book out, but it's upstairs where I can't go. And I told her what I wanted, and she said, I'll give you permission. You go up and we'll work it out. So I went up to the big library, and I found a book about that thick on the USS Constitution, the full story of that ship. And I craved the history. And I got that book home, and I would read it under the bed covers with a flashlight, all right, at night. And I got through that book. And so reading, my 5th grade teacher opened the world of reading to me. Really, really, and reading is so important. My 6th grade teacher, Miss Morton. Miss Morton was a teacher and a half. She gave us, I didn't realize it at the time, a classical education. We covered all the important things: penmanship, patriotism, poetry, prose, speaking. All those important things. It was on and on. Music appreciation. Those were the days when you could still read scripture in school. We'd have an opening when we'd read a scripture. These are the things that I remember from school. Thank you. Thank you all.